YouTube. So, Andrew, I was just enjoying you on Real Time just a couple days ago, I guess it was.
Yeah, with John Waters, one of my heroes, a hero I'm not supposed to have.
You know what's weird? I didn't know that much about, well, you and I agree on a lot of issues, but I don't know if John Waters is one of them. I have read, what's his book? Crackpot. Read that, thought it was amusing,
Funny.
except for I was like 23. I think he's an interesting guy. I think his movies suck.
Yeah, Crackpot, The Obsessions.
Do his movies suck or not?
No, I think Pecker and Serial Mom is one of the best comedies I've ever seen. I didn't
really.
Yeah. Oh, it's brilliant.
You ever see Defending Your Life?
Yeah, with Albert Brooks.
You're not going to say Serial Mom is better.
Serial
than Defending
Mom was
Your Life.
sublime. It was unbelievably good. And Pecker is fantastic. It's the origin of the term teabagging into the common vernacular.
Well, I get to see, my feeling with him is he's not funny, and thus he's kitschy. When I see a guy who's kitschy, I see a guy who's not funny, who puts on something.
Oh, my
Pencils
God.
in the mustache.
I couldn't disagree with you more.
Don't you think he has more horrible movies than good movies?
Well, I don't think Multiple Maniacs was meant to be good cinema. I think it was meant... Here's what was so great about his movies as a conservative, is that he knew what the fine line was in decent society in the 1950s, and people liked to kind of walk that fine line and see, maybe tap their toe over that fine line. His movies recognized that there was a fine line, and then he went 1,000 miles over it and did the most repulsive, gross things. And the country, I believe, needed that. It was a funny. It was funny. It was cathartic. Now the problem is that the people that copy him just do gross to be gross,
right?
And it almost seems like they want to make that normative behavior. So I think that he just has a great time with the conventions of middle class society. Unfortunately, middle class society has moved so far to gross and pathetic that there's almost nothing funny about what John Waters was doing, when at one point it was funny just to be doing it. It
was funny. My assistant fished a huge hairball of my wife's hair out of the sink today that had been clogging the sink for about 6 months. I don't know what's up with chicks, but they just shed and they're always blow drying their hair, and then the sink backs up and then they just stare at it and they live with it, and eventually he fished it out with they actually used a snake, and then he took a picture of it, and he said, "You want to see it? It's gross." And I said, "No." And he said, "But don't you want to see it?" And I said, "Not into it. I don't really want to see Osama bin Laden's blown open head. I'm not." Here's my thing. If I can't beat off to it or eat it, I don't want to see it.
Okay.
That's the way I work.
So you didn't see Faces of Death as a teenager?
I'm not interested. I feel like I have enough negative things running through my mind. You know what I mean?
Well, now that I'm an adult, I have to admit that I don't go out of my way to see John Waters, Pink Flamingos, Polyester, Multiple Maniacs. But there was a place and a time for it.
Sure.
Like midnight in college at the college theater.
Righteous Indignation's the name of the book. Excuse me while I save the world. Andrew Breitbart is here. He's got himself a website. It is Breitbart.com. And Andrew, what's the gist of the book? I've not read it. I just saw it today.
Oh, boy. The gist of the book, the reason why, first of all, it took me 7 months to come up with the title and 6 months to write it. I'm proud of the title because I found myself in a natural position of defending the Tea Party because I knew that the mainstream media was going to attack it mercilessly. And they just impugned their motives the second that they stood out there and said, "We want lower taxes. We want fiscal responsibility. We're for the Constitution." I said, uh-oh, the mainstream media is going to attack these people. And then they did. They called them racist. They called them violent. I started to defend them. And I just didn't understand these people. If you listen to what they have to say, they want to fix the country. They want to they're just your aunts and your uncles, your mothers and your fathers, and they're being perfectly reasonable. But the mainstream media came out there and started to attack them. And this book was my transformation to a great extent from being a protector of and defender of the Tea Party to actually realizing I was one of them. And I think that these people are actually helping to save the world. So this is about my travels through new media and how effective strategies of taking on the mainstream media, my battles against the mainstream media, and how the new media is pretty much taking over right now. It's a huge revolution.
Well, why why is it the second somebody says something like, I'd like to lower taxes, or I'd like to cut into the deficit and see if we could shrink that a little, or I'd like to beef up the border a little bit, I'm worried, or I'd like to make this country a little more secure around the borders. How come it doesn't take 10 minutes for someone to call him a racist? How does that work? I don't know what the correlation is.
I know what it is, and that's in the book. There's one chapter 6 in there, that's like a Glenn Beck history chalkboard, okay? Mm-hmm. And it is about how the Marxists who had tried to take over this country for so many years with the arguments of economic Marxism, who basically would try and go to the workers and say, hey, workers, you need to take over the owner. He's a bad guy. And they go, no, I've got a widget I'm working on. I think, I've got a nice house. Everything's okay. Our country was not susceptible to economic Marxist arguments. The book talks about these crazy social engineering guys from the Frankfurt School who emigrated from Nazi Germany, basically, to the United States, into Columbia University, into UCSD. Guys like the name of Adorno, Horkheimer, I could get into all of them. And they basically translated economic Marxism from the haves versus the have-nots into the oppressor versus the oppressed. And so all the people who are leaving the humanities departments, I had an American Studies degree, are leaving with this feeling there's black versus white, there's gay versus straight, and they're pitting people against each other, and that's what the leftists think. They think that if you disagree with Democratic Party policy, you have to be a racist, you have to be a sexist, you have to be a homophobe. And if the left are going to call people on the right birthers, I'm perfectly comfortable calling people on the left racers, because every time you disagree with them, eventually they call you a racist.
Yeah, it's one of these things where it's like an Asian kid who's really good with the Rubik's Cube. Speaking of racist, I am a racist. I wear it proudly. And it takes him about 3 moves, but eventually gets to racist. And it's pretty fast.
Right.
It's not the first move. It doesn't come back the first. You fire a shot, they fire back racist. It goes back, you volley like 3 times, and then the racist thing comes out. And then once they trot that out, it just hangs out. I don't understand. My whole family's a bunch of, ex-communists. I don't know what, just lazy fucks who complain about the government, who, hammer welfare checks and all this kind of stuff. And I don't understand, first things, how they think things are going to work. Like, communism doesn't work. We did an experiment. We did a controlled experiment. We took a city called Berlin, and we made a stripe through it, and it was a wall covered with barbed wire and machine gun nests, and one side of it represented communism, and the other side of it represented our form of government, and people were dying going what direction? And what side couldn't you get fresh bread in, and you were driving around 2-stroke cars? The other ones, you're drinking wine and hanging out.
It's still happening today. I mean, I was talking to a friend who's a Texas Rangers fan, and he was telling me about their new outfield prospect who's going to Double-A, and they said he's from Cuba and he defected. I'm like, they're prisoners.
Right.
It's crazy. I go, if it's such a good society and Michael Moore thinks it's so great, why are they prisoners?